30 seconds. That's all Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid had between meeting his newborn daughter and dying in a hospital hallway. The headline sounds impossible. A nurse punched a Navy admiral to save his life. But ask yourself this: if the person you love most was waiting behind one door and death was waiting behind a smile, would you recognize it in time? It's labor and delivery at Seaside Regional in San Diego. The air smells like sanitizer and hope. Fathers pace with cold coffee. Nurses whisper vitals. Somewhere a woman breathes through pain, praying her husband makes it. Then a hospital CEO steps forward with a congratulatory handshake and something invisible on his skin. Stay to the end, and you'll see how one split-second decision exposes a conspiracy and rewrites hospital security forever. Like the video and comment where you're watching from. The sound of that punch still seemed to hang in the air like the hallway itself had been hit. But 8 hours earlier there was no alarm, no shouting, no bruised jaw, no shattered bouquet on a hospital floor. There was only a man trying to outrun the life he had postponed for decades. Naval Base San Diego sat under a hard blue sky, the kind that made the Pacific look calm even when it was not. Inside a windowless briefing room, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer toner. Screens glowed with maps and timelines. Officers in khaki sat shoulder-to-shoulder, pens moving faces disciplined into neutrality. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid stood at the head of the table, posture straight, voice controlled. He was in his 50s, broad in the shoulders, the kind of man who looked built by routine. His uniform was sharp enough to cut paper. The gold on his sleeves caught the fluorescent light every time he moved his arm. He pointed at a shipping lane and spoke in clean sentences. "We keep the transit window tight. We don't drift. We don't improvise unless we have to." Someone asked about contingency plans. Someone else asked about personnel rotations. Tom answered without pausing the same way he always had. But his attention kept snagging on a small, silent rectangle in his pocket. His phone was on vibrate. It stayed there like a live wire against his thigh. The officers around him didn't notice the tiny tells, the slight delay before he responded, the way his gaze flicked toward the door as if he expected someone to burst in, the way his wedding band caught on the edge of his pocket when his fingers brushed it like he was checking whether it still existed. A commander cleared his throat. "Sir, regarding the next quarter deployment schedule." Tom nodded, but the words blurred. He could hear his own voice, steady and practiced, while another part of him listened for a different sound. A different call, a different kind of emergency. His phone vibrated. It was so small a movement that no one else would have felt it. Tom did. He reached into his pocket like he was drawing a weapon and pulled the phone out. The screen lit his face for half a second. "Elise." His mouth went dry. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Not in that room. Not with that many eyes and that much authority pressing down on the moment. He tapped the voicemail icon. His thumb hovered, and for a heartbeat he just stared at her name like it was a doorway he was afraid to open. Then he hit play. Her voice came through the tiny speaker, thin and strained, breathy, in the way pain makes you speak differently. "Tom." A pause, a shaky inhale. "The doctor says it's time. I'm in labor. I need you here. Please, please don't miss this." The room didn't move, but Tom did. Something in his face changed first. Then his shoulders, as if a weight he had been carrying, finally shifted. He held the phone like it might break if he gripped it too hard. A soft, involuntary sound left his throat, not quite a breath, not quite a word. He looked up. Every officer at the table had gone quiet. They were trained to read a room, to spot a threat, to detect weakness. But this was not a threat they recognized. Tom set the phone down on the table palm, flat over it, like he was pinning it in place. "Gentlemen," he said. His voice didn't crack. That was the thing about him. It rarely did. But there was a tightness under the words, a tension that made them feel heavier than their syllables. "My wife is in labor." A young lieutenant blinked, unsure how to respond. The commander, who had been speaking, opened his mouth as if to offer protocol. "Sir, we can—" Tom shook his head once firm. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for the chair to speak. He didn't wait for the ritual that had governed most of his adult life. He picked up his cover. He turned toward the door. "Continue without me," he said. A colonel started to stand. "Admiral, the debrief." Tom paused at the threshold and looked back at them. His eyes were calm, but there was a warning there too, the kind that said this topic had a perimeter and no one should cross it. "I've missed enough," he said. He walked out. The hallway outside the briefing room was long and bright-lined with framed photographs of ships, ceremonies, handshakes with politicians, medals pinned to uniforms. A museum of devotion. Tom's footsteps echoed once, twice, then sped up. He moved through security without thinking. He was a man who knew every angle of this place, every checkpoint, every camera. His badge beeped, the gate clicked, the world opened. Outside, the sun hit his face and he squinted like a man stepping into a different life. His car was parked in the same place it always was. The same routine, the same control. He unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and for a moment he just sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing shallowly. Elise's voice still rang in his ear. "Please don't miss this." He stared at the dashboard. The faint reflection of his face stared back, older than he felt, harder than he wanted to be. He turned the key. The engine caught. He backed out too fast, tires crunching gravel at the edge of the lot. San Diego traffic swelled around him. Afternoon light poured across the windshield. He drove like a man who had learned to make time obey him. He threaded between cars, checked mirrors, calculated gaps, and still the minutes felt like they were slipping away from him. At a red light, he stopped. His fingers tapped the wheel once, twice, then stilled. He glanced at his phone mounted near the dash. No new message. The silence gnawed at him. His mind drifted not to the base, not to the ocean, not to the maps he had been reading. It drifted to a kitchen years ago, and a small plastic stick held in Elise's trembling hand. He remembered her smile, the way it had cracked when she started crying. "You're sure?" he'd asked, voice low, like speaking louder might scare it away. Elise had nodded, eyes wet. "I'm sure." He had pulled her into his arms. She smelled like soap and late-night tea. He had pressed his forehead to hers and said something he'd never said with a mission on the line. "I'm here," he'd whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." A horn blared behind him. The light had turned green. Tom surged forward, jaw clenched. He thought of other moments too, the ones he usually kept sealed. Elise on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, shoulders shaking. Tom kneeling beside her in uniform, still wearing his boots because he'd come straight from a flight. Her face had been pale and furious and broken all at once. "Stop saying you're sorry," she'd snapped, voice raw. "Just be here." He had tried. He had been there that night. But there had been so many nights when he wasn't. He remembered the first miscarriage. He had been on a ship. The satellite call had been delayed. Elise had left a message that sounded like she was speaking through water. "It's gone," she'd said. "It's gone, Tom." He had stared at the bulkhead in his cabin and felt something collapse in his chest. He had hit the wall once with his fist, not hard enough to break bones, just hard enough to punish himself for being trapped behind steel and duty and distance. After the second miscarriage, Elise didn't call right away. She waited until he landed, until he walked into their house still smelling like jet fuel, until he saw the unused nursery paint samples stacked on the dining table like a cruel joke. She looked at him with eyes that had stopped expecting comfort from words. "I can't do this alone," she'd said. He had started to argue, to explain, to list obligations. He had stopped when he saw her hands. They were shaking, not from weakness, from restraint. He had sat down at the kitchen table and taken her hands in his, careful, like holding a wound. "I don't know how to fix it," he'd admitted. Elise had pulled her hands back. "You don't have to fix it. You have to show up." Traffic tightened. Tom's shoulders rose. He checked the clock. He checked the road. He checked the clock again. His phone buzzed. A text. "Where are you?" He swallowed hard and typed with his thumb while keeping his eyes on the lanes. 2 minutes, I love you. He hit send. His throat tightened at the simplicity of it. 2 minutes. Like time could be packaged, like love could be delivered on schedule. He took the next exit and cut through side streets. The neighborhoods changed from base-adjacent strip malls to quieter blocks. He passed a playground. A father pushed a toddler on a swing. The child shrieked with laughter. Tom's chest ached with something he refused to name. He turned onto a street lined with small storefronts. A flower shop sat on the corner with its lights still on. The sign in the window said they were closing soon. He braked, pulled into a spot, half crooked, and got out. Inside, the air was thick with sweetness and green stems. A bell chimed over the door. A tired woman behind the counter looked up, ready to tell him they were closed, then saw his uniform and the look on his face. "Sir," she said, gentler than she meant to be. Tom approached the counter. He didn't browse, he didn't hesitate. "I need flowers," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "Whatever you have, pink, white, everything you can spare." The woman blinked, then nodded. She moved quickly, hands practiced gathering roses, wrapping them in brown paper, tying a ribbon around the stems. Tom watched her fingers as if he could anchor himself in the ordinary motion of it. "You having a baby?" she asked softly. Tom swallowed. "My wife is." The woman smiled, and for a moment the world didn't feel like a battle plan. "Congratulations," she said. Tom took the bouquet. The stems were cool and damp against his palm. He paid without looking at the total. He walked back outside, the roses bright against the darkening street. In his car, he set the bouquet carefully on the passenger seat. He stared at it. The flowers looked absurdly gentle. They looked like a promise made visible. He started driving again, and as the hospital came into view, his breathing changed. Shorter. Higher. Like his body knew it was approaching a moment that could split his life into before and after. Seaside Regional Medical Center rose above the streetlights, glass and concrete, a place that never truly slept. The entrance canopy glowed. Cars moved in and out like blood through an artery. Tom pulled into the parking structure and parked too far from the elevator. He didn't care. He grabbed the bouquet and walked fast, his shoes striking the concrete with urgency. Inside the hospital, the air was cooler. It smelled like antiseptic and warmed plastic and faint coffee. A television in the waiting area played a muted news channel. A vending machine hummed. A man in scrubs leaned against a wall, eyes closed, forehead pressed to his knuckles, as if praying. Tom passed a family clustered near the elevator. A grandmother held a rosary. A teenage boy stared at the floor, jaw tight. A young father bounced on his heels, clutching a paper cup. Tom felt like he was moving through a world that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with him at the same time. He reached the reception desk. The clerk looked up and immediately understood. People recognized that look, that mix of fear and joy. "Labor and delivery," Tom said. The clerk smiled. "4th floor." He nodded once, and his gratitude was clumsily trapped behind a wall of urgency. "Thank you." He stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut. The fluorescent light inside was unforgiving. It showed him his own face in the mirrored panel, the faint gray at his temples, the tight line at his mouth. His phone buzzed again. He stared at it. A message from Elise, shorter now, like she didn't have breath to spare. "Please hurry." His fingers tightened around the bouquet. The elevator rose. Each floor chimed like a countdown. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the corridor smelled different. Cleaner, sharper, layered with that faint metallic note hospitals carried when they were close to birth and blood and beginning. A sign on the wall read "Labor and Delivery." Tom walked toward it, faster than he should, bouquet held in front of him like a shield. He passed a nurse pushing a cart stacked with linens. She gave him a quick glance and a small smile, then kept moving. He passed a closed door and heard a woman's voice inside, strained and rhythmic, riding pain like waves. A male voice answered her steady coaching. "Breathe with me. That's it, right there." Tom's eyes stung. He turned the corner into a longer hallway leading deeper into the unit. The lights were softer here, as if the hospital tried to be kind to the people living their biggest moments. He touched his wedding band with his thumb. "I'm here," he murmured, not into a phone, not to anyone who could hear, but to the air itself, as if saying it could make it true. 5 floors above him, in an office lit by a single lamp, Dr. Julian Mercer stood at a sink and washed his hands far longer than necessary, watching the water run clear, as if that meant something. The water kept running long after Julian Mercer's hands were clean. He stared into the stainless steel sink as if the drain could swallow the last 8 years along with the soap. The office was quiet, except for the faucet and the distant muffled life of a hospital after dark, a cart rolling somewhere, an intercom chime, a baby's brief cry that rose and vanished like a match struck in wind. Mercer shut off the tap. He dried his hands with a paper towel, slow and deliberate, then dropped it into the trash with surgical neatness. On the counter sat a small, unmarked container, the kind that could hold ointment or lip balm. He did not open it yet. He did not have to. Not yet. His phone buzzed on the desk. A single text from a number saved without a name. He looked at it and felt his pulse settle into a calm he had practiced. 20 minutes. He sat down, pulled a leather notebook from the drawer and opened it to a page creased from being turned too often. The handwriting was tight, controlled, almost elegant. A man could read it and mistake it for discipline, for professionalism. Mercer read the line he had written months ago, then traced it with the pad of his finger as if confirming it was real. Tonight he loses what he waited for. He set the notebook down and turned in his chair to face the wall of framed certificates. White coats. Smiles. A photo of him shaking hands with the senator at a fundraiser, both men angled toward the camera, like trust was a product you could sell. Another photo showed him presenting an award to a nurse, his expression warm, paternal safe. He wondered briefly what it would feel like to be that man for real. The thought passed. It did not stick. Mercer opened a different drawer and removed a thin folder. Inside were printouts, maps, schedules, and a grainy photo taken from a distance, a Navy base gate with Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid, walking through in uniform, head-down, phone in his hand. Mercer had not been present for the photograph. He had paid someone to be. He looked at the image and felt a cold, familiar pressure behind his sternum. Not rage. Rage was messy. Rage made mistakes. What Mercer carried was quieter, more patient. He closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer. He checked his watch. He could hear his own breathing. Then he stood and walked to the mirror by the door. His reflection stared back, composed, expensive suit tailored to make his shoulders look wider, his tie perfectly centered. He practiced a smile. It was flawless. It did not reach his eyes. He adjusted his cufflinks. In that mirror, he saw a hospital CEO. He saw a man people thanked when their loved ones survived surgery. He also saw the courtroom. He saw it so clearly that the smell came with it, the faint staleness of recycled air and old wood, the sharp bite of legal paper, the heat of a camera light, the hum of whispered judgment. 8 years earlier, the world had taught him that everything could be destroyed in a single day. The courtroom in Virginia had been packed. Reporters in the back, families in the front, lawyers moving like predators around a wounded animal. Julian Mercer sat behind his mother, his suit cheap, and wrinkled, his hands clasped too tightly. His mother's shoulders were rigid, as if she could hold her dignity in place through sheer force. At the defense table sat his brother Ethan, wrists cuffed, hair trimmed too short by jail clippers. Ethan looked older than he had any right to look. There were bruises under his eyes that makeup could not hide. Ethan searched the room until he found Julian. When their eyes met, Ethan's face broke just slightly, like a man trying not to drown. Julian's mother leaned back, whispering without turning, "Don't stare. Don't give them satisfaction." Julian did not look away. On the prosecution side, photos were projected on a screen. A warehouse. Weapons crates. Cash bundles. Men with guns in their hands and hatred in their faces. The name Victor Dragoon appeared on the screen like a curse. The prosecutor spoke as if the words were clean. Operation Black Harbor was designed to dismantle an arms trafficking network supplying terrorist groups operating across Europe. The defendant, Ethan Mercer, acted as a logistics facilitator within that network. Ethan shook his head violently. "No," he said. His voice cracked with panic. "I moved shipments. I thought it was medical supplies. I thought it was equipment." "I did not know." The judge did not blink. Julian watched his brother's hands tremble. Ethan had always been the steady one. The big brother who fixed Julian's bike when the chain came off. The one who stayed up late to teach him how to drive. The one who called their mother every Sunday without being asked. Now Ethan looked like a man caught in machinery. A Navy officer sat in the front row with the prosecutor uniform immaculate, posture perfect. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid did not testify. He did not need to. His presence was enough. He was the face of the operation, the one whose signature sat on the orders, the one who could call it justice and walk away. Julian had never seen him before that day. He would never forget him after. When the sentence came, it landed like a hammer. 15 years. Ethan's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table, breathing hard, eyes wild. Julian's mother made a sound that did not fit in a courtroom. A small, animal sound. She pressed her palm to her chest as if her heart had been struck. Julian stood not realizing he was standing. A bailiff turned toward him, warning in his eyes. Ethan looked over his shoulder one last time. "I didn't mean to," Ethan said. He was crying now. "I didn't mean to. Jules, tell Mom. Tell her I'm sorry." Julian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His mother did not cry. She simply stared forward with glass eyes as if tears would be surrender. Vice Admiral Kincaid rose from his seat and turned to leave. He did not look back. He did not see Julian. He did not acknowledge the family behind him. He walked out as if the lives he had shattered were a necessary cost, a line item on a mission report. Julian watched him go. He felt something inside him go still. 2 weeks later, Julian's mother collapsed in their kitchen. Julian found her on the tile floor, lips, slightly blue eyes half open. He knelt and called 911 with shaking hands, trying to remember how to speak, while terror pressed on his throat. The paramedics arrived fast. They moved his mother onto a gurney with efficient hands. Someone said the word stroke. Someone said time matters. Julian rode in the ambulance, holding her fingers, begging her to squeeze back. She did not. She lived, but she was not the same. She forgot names. She forgot dates. She forgot the sound of Ethan's laugh. Neighbors stopped coming by. Friends who had once brought casseroles after holidays now crossed the street to avoid conversation. The family business, a small shipping company his father had built, lost contracts. The name Mercer had become a stain. Julian sat beside his mother's bed one night as she stared at a blank television screen. Her eyes drifted toward him unfocused. "Where is Ethan?" she asked softly. Julian swallowed. "He's away," he said. She frowned, confused. "Why?" Julian could not answer without tasting bitterness. "Because a man you have never met decided our lives were acceptable collateral." He did not say it out loud. He simply sat there in the dim light, listening to his mother's uneven breathing, and felt a new kind of certainty grow. He would become the sort of man no one could dismiss, no one could ignore, no one could walk past without noticing. He would earn trust so thoroughly that people would offer him their hands. Back in the present, in a high-floor office overlooking San Diego, Julian Mercer stepped away from the mirror and opened the small, unmarked container. Inside was clear gel, smooth as water, catching the light just enough to look harmless. He dipped 2 fingers in, then spread it carefully across his right palm. It did not smell like anything to most people. That was the point. It had been designed to slip past ordinary senses. It needed skin to do its work. It needed contact. It needed trust. Mercer flexed his fingers, spreading the gel evenly, careful to coat the lines of his palm, the pads of his fingers, the places where another man's hand would press. He closed the container and slid it into his pocket. His phone buzzed again. A new text. "He is here." Mercer exhaled. He did not feel excitement. Excitement was sloppy. He felt focus. He felt the narrowing of the world into a simple corridor and a simple gesture. He left his office, locking the door behind him. In the hallway outside, a pair of nurses walked past, laughing softly about something mundane. Mercer nodded as they passed. One of them smiled back, unaware her safety depended on the fragile assumption that leadership was not dangerous. He rode the elevator down in silence, hands clasped behind his back right palm, hidden, protected, ready. On the 4th floor, labor and delivery moved like a heartbeat. Natalie Hart stepped out of a patient room holding a chart. The overhead lights softened the edges of everything, as if the hospital understood that life began here and tried to be gentler. Her shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned how to be calm on purpose. Inside the room, she had just left, a woman in early labor sat upright, brow damp, eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. Natalie had seen that look all night. The look that said, "I am not afraid of pain. I am afraid of being alone in it." She returned to the room with a cup of ice chips and set it down within reach. "Try a few," Natalie said. Her voice was low, steady, slow breaths. "You're doing better than you think." The woman laughed weakly. "You say that to everybody." Natalie smiled, but it was not the sort of smile that dismissed fear. It was a smile that made space for it. "I say it because it's usually true," she said. "And when it isn't, I stay anyway." The woman's eyes softened. "You've got kids." Natalie's hands paused on the bed rail for half a second. "No," she said, "not yet. Boyfriend." Natalie adjusted the monitor strap, fingers careful. "A stubborn houseplant," she said. The woman snorted. The tension in her shoulders eased. Natalie checked the vitals and made a note. The routine was comforting. Numbers behaved. Machines beeped in predictable rhythms. The chaos of emotion could be guided with breath and a hand on the shoulder. Outside the room, another nurse approached, younger hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes tired. "Nat," she said, lowering her voice. "You're on Kincaid's wife tonight." Natalie blinked. The name hit her, as a fact nothing more, but she noticed her colleague's tone. "The Admiral's wife," the nurse added. "VIP status, security detail, everyone's on edge." Natalie nodded once. "Which room?" 7. Natalie glanced down the hallway toward the room 7, where a faint glow spilled from beneath the door. She could hear muffled voices inside, a woman's breath, cycling through pain, a doctor giving calm instructions. She did not like VIP status. It made people behave differently. It turned care into performance. Natalie walked toward room 7. In the nurse's station, a unit clerk named Devon sat behind the desk sorting paperwork. He was in his 20s, face, smooth eyes, always moving. When Natalie passed, Devon smiled too quickly. "How's it going tonight?" he asked. Natalie kept walking, but she clocked the detail. Devon's fingers were tapping the desk in a nervous rhythm. "Busy," she said. Devon's phone buzzed. He glanced down at it, then up again. The smile came back stretched, forced. "Big night," he said. Natalie looked at him for a beat longer than necessary. "Are you okay?" she asked. Devon cleared his throat. "Yeah," he said. "Just, people watching, cameras, important folks." Natalie nodded and moved on. Room 7 smelled like antiseptic warmed plastic and sweat. Elise Kincaid lay on the bed, dark hair stuck to her forehead. She looked older than her file photo. Pain did that. Pain stripped away the polished version of people. Elise's eyes darted to Natalie's badge. "Hart," Elise said between breaths. "Nurse Hart!" Natalie stepped closer. "That's me," she said. "I'm here with you." Elise's hands clenched the bedsheet. Her knuckles were white. "Where is he?" she whispered. Natalie checked the monitor, then met Elise's eyes. "He's on his way," Natalie said. "You're not alone." Elise swallowed hard. Tears gathered but did not fall. She was trying to stay composed. Natalie respected that. She also respected the way composure could be a mask for terror. "My husband, Elise," said, voice tight, "has missed everything. He promised me he'd be here." Natalie leaned in, slightly lowering her voice so it would not feel like a performance. "He's coming," she said again, not as reassurance but as a statement she wanted to be true. "And right now you're doing the work he can't do for you. You're carrying this. You're strong." Elise's eyes closed. "I'm tired," she said. Natalie put a hand on her shoulder. Warm, steady. "I know," Natalie said. "Stay with your breath. Stay with me." Elise inhaled shakily. "Okay," she said as if agreeing to survive. Natalie checked Elise's IV, made an adjustment, and spoke to the doctor in the room, a calm woman with a clipped ponytail and precise movements. "Contractions are tightening," Natalie said. "Her pressure is creeping." The doctor nodded, eyes on the monitor. "Keep an eye on it," she said. "If it spikes again, we call anesthesia and prep." Elise heard the word prep, and her eyes snapped open. "Prep for what?" Natalie answered before fear could run wild. "Prep just means we plan," she said. "Planning keeps you safe." Elise stared at her, searching for honesty. Natalie held her gaze. "We plan so we don't panic?" Natalie added. Elise exhaled long and trembling. Outside the room, Natalie stepped into the hallway and took a breath. She did not notice she was doing it until she realized she was trying to smell the air. It was an old habit, a buried habit, one she had spent years teaching herself to ignore. She told herself it was nothing. She moved back toward the station, passing a supply closet. A faint chemical odor seeped from inside harmless, ordinary cleaning products. She cataloged it automatically, then forced her mind away. At the station, her colleague returned, rubbing her temples. "You ever wonder why you're always so steady?" the colleague asked. Natalie glanced up. "Steady," she repeated. "Yeah," the colleague said. "Stuff happens, people scream blood emergencies. You're like a metronome." Natalie's pen paused. She could have lied easily. She could have shrugged and said experience. She could have made a joke. Instead, she offered something closer to truth. "Some people learn calm the hard way," she said. Her colleague looked at her curious. Natalie's eyes went back to the chart. "Get some water," Natalie added. "You look like you're running on fumes." The colleague smiled and walked away. Natalie stared at the medication drawer, reading labels without absorbing them. Her mind drifted to a different hallway, a different kind of hospital, a children's ward in a city far from the ocean. Dim lighting, a smell she could never forget even years later. Not just disinfectant, something under it, something sweet and wrong. She remembered kneeling on a tile floor as alarms screamed. She remembered a child's small hand gripping her sleeve. She remembered looking at a doctor's face as he realized they were losing. She remembered saying the compound name out loud and hearing how useless it sounded against death. Natalie blinked and came back to the nurse's station. Devin was still there. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down, then stood quickly, too quickly. "I've got to run a form upstairs," he said. Natalie watched him. "Upstairs where?" she asked. Devin froze half a second. "Admin," he said, then forced a laugh. "You know, paperwork never sleeps." Natalie nodded slowly. Devin avoided her eyes and hurried off. Natalie returned to her tasks. She moved through the unit, checked on patients, adjusted drips. Guided breathing reminded fathers to sit down before they fainted. She was good at this. Nursing felt like real work, honest work. You could not fake care at 3 a.m. with a screaming patient and a monitor alarming. In between rooms, she caught glimpses of security personnel near the elevator, their posture attentive, their earpieces barely visible. VIP, she thought again. Important people making ordinary spaces tense. She walked into the supply room to restock gloves. The fluorescent light inside buzzed faintly. The shelves were neatly labeled, everything in its place. Natalie reached for a box of nitrile gloves and paused. Something tingled at the base of her skull. It was not pain, not illness. It was a sensation like a warning wire being plucked. Natalie stood still, breathing quietly, letting her senses sort through the layers of smell. Bleach, alcohol wipes, latex, plastic, paper, a faint trace of lavender lotion, all normal. Then, underneath a thread she could not name immediately. Not here, she told herself, not again, not in this place. She exhaled and grabbed the gloves anyway. Back in the hallway, the overhead speaker crackled, then went silent. A nurse laughed softly in a room down the hall. A baby cried and was soothed. Natalie forced her shoulders to relax. She walked back to room 7. Elise's breathing was rougher now. The doctor's voice was calm but tighter. Natalie stepped in and checked the monitor. Elise stared at her. "Is something wrong?" Elise asked. Natalie kept her expression composed. "Something is changing," she said. "That doesn't mean wrong. It means we watch closely." Elise grabbed Natalie's wrist, surprising her with strength. "Please," Elise whispered. "If he's not here." Natalie covered Elise's hand with her own. "He's coming," she said again. "And you are not doing this alone." Elise's eyes filled. "He promised me," she said. Natalie did not offer platitudes. She offered presence. "I'm here," she said, "right now. Breathe with me." Elise inhaled. Natalie inhaled with her. They exhaled together. For a moment, Elise's fear had somewhere to land. Natalie stepped out of the room and saw the security detail shift near the elevator. A man in plain clothes with a military haircut spoke into an earpiece. Another scanned the corridor with an alertness that did not belong in a hospital. Natalie's pulse ticked higher. She told herself it was nothing. VIP nerves. The unit always tightened around important people. Still, that strange thread in the air returned faint but persistent. She looked toward the elevator. The doors were closed. On the 5th floor, Julian Mercer stepped out of his office corridor and moved toward the elevator with a measured pace. A passerby nodded at him. "Dr. Mercer," the passerby said. Mercer returned the nod, politely right hand tucked casually into his pocket. The elevator doors opened. Mercer entered. He stood alone, staring at the numbers as they descended each floor, a quiet step toward an act he had rehearsed in his mind so many times it no longer felt like a choice. He did not think of his brother's laugh anymore. He did not think of his mother's confused eyes. Those memories had been compressed into something harder and simpler. A hand, a hallway, a moment. When the elevator reached the 4th floor, the doors slid open. Mercer stepped out and walked with purpose toward labor and delivery. He passed a sign that said, "Welcome New Families." A painted mural of ocean waves and smiling dolphins decorated the wall. He did not look at it. He passed a nurse pushing a cart. She smiled at him automatically. He smiled back automatically. Inside his pocket, the gel sat on his skin like a secret. In the nurse's station, Devon returned face slightly flushed as if he had run. He sat down quickly and typed something on his computer. Natalie watched him from the corner of her eye. Devon's phone buzzed. He glanced down and his fingers trembled as he typed a reply. Natalie's instincts stirred again. She walked to the station, set a chart down, and leaned slightly toward Devon. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. Devon blinked up at her, startled. "Yeah," he said too fast. "Fine, just busy." Natalie held his gaze. Devon swallowed. Natalie's voice softened, not accusing, just steady. "If you need help," she said, "you can ask." Devon's eyes darted away. "I'm good," he muttered. Natalie stepped back, letting him have space while her mind filed the interaction away. She returned to the hallway and paused near the corner that led deeper into the unit. The air felt different there. It was subtle. Most people would never notice. Natalie noticed. Her chest tightened slightly. Her breathing shifted, becoming shallower as her body prepared for something she could not yet name. She closed her eyes for half a second and inhaled slowly, letting her mind separate the smells like a trained analyst sorting signals from noise. Sanitizer, plastic, soap, then faintly something that did not belong. A clean, sterile wrongness. A chemical thread without a home. Natalie opened her eyes. Her pupils had widened, her jaw set. She stood very still, listening to the rhythm of the unit. The beeps, the footsteps, the quiet conversations behind doors. In her head, a voice she had not heard in years returned with crisp authority. "You have seconds, not minutes." Natalie's fingers curled once, then relaxed. She looked down the corridor toward the elevators again. The doors opened. A figure stepped out in a suit, moving with quiet confidence. Natalie watched him approach, and her skin prickled, as if a cold wind had found its way indoors. She did not know why yet. She only knew her body recognized danger before her mind could explain it. Mercer walked past the mural of dolphins, past the welcome new family sign, past nurses who trusted him without thinking. He approached the central stretch of hallway and stopped as if he had every right to be there. He picked up a clipboard from a counter and held it like a prop. Natalie remained near the corner, watching him with a stillness that was not calm so much as controlled. Room 7's door opened briefly and a doctor stepped out, speaking quietly to another nurse. Natalie did not move. Her attention stayed locked. Mercer glanced at his watch. Then, somewhere behind Natalie, the elevator chimed again, and she heard the sound of hurried footsteps from the main corridor. A man's voice, tight with emotion, asked directions. Natalie turned her head slightly. Through the glass doors at the entrance to the unit, she saw a Navy officer in uniform moving fast, clutching a bouquet of roses like a lifeline. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid. Natalie's pulse jumped. She did not connect the pieces yet, not consciously, but the chemical thread in the air seemed to sharpen as if the wrongness had found its target. Natalie took one step into the hallway, then stopped. She inhaled again, deeper this time. The scent was faint but unmistakably out of place. Her gaze returned to Mercer. He stood too still, too ready. Natalie's fingers flexed at her side. Behind her, the unit continued its work. Machines beeped, nurses moved. A woman cried out in pain, then breathed through it. Natalie's world narrowed to a man in a suit holding a clipboard he did not need, and a vice admiral walking toward him with hope in his hands. Natalie's throat tightened as her mind tried to name the thing her senses already knew. Contact, transfer, skin, seconds. She took another step forward, not running, not yet, just moving as if drawn by a gravity she could not resist. Mercer lifted his head and smiled toward the approaching Admiral. Natalie watched that smile and felt her stomach drop. It was the smile of a man who had already decided. She breathed in once more, and the chemical thread snapped into clarity in her mind, sharp as a blade. Natalie's muscles tensed. In room 7, Elise Kincaid cried out again, voice breaking as she fought through another contraction. Natalie heard it like a siren. She stepped forward. The corridor felt suddenly narrower, as if the walls had inched closer to listen. The light above the nurse's station hummed steady and indifferent. Somewhere behind a closed door, a woman moaned through a contraction, and the sound made the hairs on Natalie's arms lift. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid moved down the hall with the awkward urgency of a man trying not to run. The bouquet on his forearm looked too delicate for his uniform petals, trembling with every step. His face held that rare expression that military men wore only when they believed the world might finally give something back. He saw the suit before he saw the smile. Dr. Julian Mercer stood near the corner clipboard, angled across his chest, posture relaxed like he had simply happened to be in the right place at the right time. He did not look surprised to see the Vice Admiral. He looked prepared. Tom slowed, polite reflex taking over. He had lived his whole adult life on reflexes. Salutes, handshakes, nods, the small rituals that kept the world orderly. Mercer's smile widened with practiced warmth. Admiral Kincaid Mercer said, voice smooth and professional. "Congratulations. We're honored to have you here." Tom returned the smile automatically. The words barely landed. His mind was already in room 7 with Elise, with the sound of her breathing, with the fear he could hear in her voice. He shifted the flowers to his left arm to free his right hand. "Thank you," Dr. Tom said. "My wife is—" His sentence trailed off as Mercer extended his hand. A simple gesture. A normal moment. The kind of thing that happened 1,000 times a day in this building. Natalie watched the hand appear in the air. Her body reacted before her mind finished naming what her nose had already separated from the clean hospital scents. The wrongness was sharper now, closer. It rode on the air like a thin metallic sweetness, wrapped in something synthetic and slick. Mercer's right palm faced Tom open and inviting. Natalie felt her chest tighten. Her mouth went dry. She could not explain it fast enough. She could not shout a chemical name and expect strangers to stop moving. She could not call security and wait for protocols to awaken. She did not have time to be believed. Tom's hand lifted toward Mercer's without hesitation. The space between their palms was small, shrinking. Natalie's vision narrowed. The hallway noise faded into a low roar, like the ocean heard from underwater. Her breath came shallow. Her feet shifted. Her muscles loaded as if she had been trained to run toward the threat instead of away from it. She saw Lisa's face in her mind for a blink, sweat on her forehead, eyes glassy with pain, whispering, "Where is he?" Natalie moved. At first it was a step, then another, then her body tipped forward, and the step became a sprint. Her shoes slapped the polished floor. The bouquet shook on Tom's arm. Mercer's hand stayed extended, steady as a promise. Natalie ran straight down the corridor, head slightly lowered, eyes locked on the point where skin was about to meet skin. A nurse near the station turned, startled Natalie. Natalie did not answer. Tom glanced up, confused by movement in his peripheral vision. He saw a woman in scrubs charging at him with a face that looked like terror and certainty welded together. What the Tom began. Mercer's smile flickered just a fraction, as if annoyance had touched him before the world returned to normal. Tom's hand kept moving. Military reflex did not stop for confusion. Natalie closed the distance with her lungs burning. 10 feet, 8, 6. Mercer's fingertips were inches from Tom's. Natalie's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. She did not aim for Mercer. She aimed for the handshake. She aimed for the only thing she could interrupt. Tom's eyes widened as she arrived. Natalie planted her left foot, rotated her hips, and drove her fist upward. Her knuckles connected with Tom's jaw with a sound that was all wrong in a hospital, a sharp crack that echoed off tile and glass. Tom's head snapped sideways. His shoulder hit the wall hard enough to rattle the frame of a safety poster. The bouquet flew from his arm. Roses scattered across the floor stems, rolling like dropped instruments. For half a second, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. Tom staggered, eyes watering, one hand rising to his bruised face. His other arm flailed for balance. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, voice thick with shock and pain. Natalie's chest heaved. She pivoted toward Mercer, throwing her body between the two men like a barrier. "Do not touch him," she yelled, voice raw. "Do not touch his hand." Mercer took a half-step back, expression shifting from surprise to fury, so fast it looked rehearsed. His voice rose indignant, loud enough to draw attention. "Security," Mercer snapped. "Get her off him." She assaulted a flag officer. A Marine in plain clothes surged forward from the elevator area, eyes scanning for a weapon that Natalie did not have. 2 security guards sprinted in from the side corridor. Natalie kept her eyes on Mercer's right hand. It was still open, still offered, still deadly. "Swab his palm," she shouted. "Right hand, now!" One of the guards grabbed Natalie's arm. She twisted, trying to keep her body between Mercer and everyone else. "Contact poison," she said, the words coming out clipped and urgent. "Synthetic. Lethal." The guard tightened his grip and forced her down. Natalie hit the floor on one knee, pain shooting up her leg. She did not stop yelling. "Do not let him wipe his hand," she shouted. "Do not let anyone touch him." Mercer's eyes flashed. He moved his right hand toward his jacket as if to casually wipe it away. A Marine stepped in instantly and seized Mercer's wrist. "Sir, do not move," the Marine said, voice low, dangerous. Mercer jerked, offended. "Get your hands off me." The Marine did not release him. Tom pushed off the wall, still holding his jaw. His eyes bounced between Natalie on the floor and Mercer being held. "This is insane," Tom said, struggling to speak through the ache. "Someone explain." A nurse rushed in from a room, face pale. "What happened?" Another nurse grabbed a phone at the station, fingers flying. "Code security. Labor and delivery hallway. Now." The unit clerk, Devon, stood behind the desk, frozen, his face drained. His phone was in his handscreen lit. He stared at Mercer, then at Natalie, then at the Marines, as if watching a trap spring and realizing he had been standing inside it. Mercer's voice sharpened. "She is unstable. I want her restrained." The security guards complied. One pressed Natalie's shoulder down, forcing her chest toward the floor. Cold tile kissed her cheek. Natalie's breath came in harsh pulls. She twisted her head to keep Mercer in sight. "Test him," she said again, voice cracking. "Please, test his right palm." Tom took a step closer, still unsteady. "Nurse," he said. "Why would you do that?" Natalie looked up at him. Her eyes were wide-focused, desperate. "Because you were reaching for death," she said, each word forced through adrenaline. "And you do not get to die in front of your wife's delivery room." That landed differently. Tom's face shifted. Confusion remained, but something heavier moved beneath it. A rapid series of footsteps thundered down the corridor. A hazmat response team rounded the corner in protective suits carrying a portable case. They moved with practiced speed, silent except for the hiss of their own breathing. One technician raised a gloved hand. "Everyone, stay where you are," the tech called voice-controlled. No contact, no movement. The hallway stilled as if the order had snapped a spine into place. The technician approached Mercer, whose right wrist was still pinned by the Marine. "Sir," the tech said, calm, "I need to swab your right palm." Mercer's face hardened. "This is ridiculous." The Marine tightened his grip. Mercer's eyes flicked to Tom, then to the onlookers gathering at a distance. He tried to sound outraged, reasonable, wronged. "I run this hospital," he said. "You are humiliating me because of a violent nurse." Natalie's voice cut through it. "Do it," she said, "now." The hazmat technician produced a sterile swab. The tip hovered for a moment over Mercer's skin. Mercer tried to pull back. The Marine held him in place. The swab touched Mercer's palm. Natalie's breath hitched. Her whole body tensed as if the swab itself could trigger something. The technician withdrew the swab and moved to the portable analyzer. Another hazmat tech approached Tom cautiously. "Sir, I need to check your hand," the tech said. Tom lifted his right hand, then paused, staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. The hand that had been inches from Mercer's. His fingers trembled slightly. The tech swabbed Tom's palm. The tech looked at the swab, then at the analyzer, then nodded once to a partner. No visible transfer. Natalie exhaled shakily. It sounded like relief and grief braided together. The first tech inserted Mercer's swab into the test kit. The analyzer beeped softly, a small indifferent sound that carried too much weight. A crowd had formed at the far end of the corridor, staff peeking around doorways, a doctor holding a chart to her chest like armor. Someone whispered, "Poison." Someone else whispered, "In labor and delivery." Tom's Marine detail moved closer, forming a loose perimeter around him without being asked. Their faces were hard, their eyes sharp, the training in their bodies visible. This was their world now. Threat, containment, control. Mercer's composure began to fray. "You are making a mistake," he said, voice strained. "This will destroy the hospital's reputation." The hazmat technician did not look up. 9 seconds, the tech murmured. Preliminary read. 9 seconds stretched. Natalie's cheek was cold against the tile. A security guard's knee pressed into her back. Her arms were pinned. She could feel the cuff biting into her wrist. Her eyes stayed locked on Mercer. Mercer stared at the analyzer like a man watching his own reflection crack. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. He tried to pull his hand again as if willpower could erase chemistry. Tom swallowed and tried to steady his voice. "Who are you?" he asked Natalie. Natalie forced her chin up a fraction. "Natalie Hart," she said, breathless. "Registered nurse." "That is not what I mean," Tom said, the words rough. "Nobody does what you did without knowing something." Natalie's gaze flicked to him. "I smelled it," she said. A doctor in the crowd scoffed involuntarily. Smelled what? Natalie's eyes did not leave Mercer. "A compound that does not belong in a hospital hallway," she said. "Not in labor and delivery." The hazmat technician lifted his head slowly. His eyes widened. For a heartbeat, the hallway was silent enough to hear the faint hiss of ventilation. The technician's voice came out low and disbelieving. Positive. The word hit the corridor like a dropped metal tray. He looked around, then spoke louder. Positive result. Highly toxic synthetic compound. Lethal on contact. A collective gasp rolled through the staff. A nurse covered her mouth with both hands. A doctor's face went pale. Tom froze. His bruised jaw didn't matter anymore. His eyes were locked on Mercer, and the reality clicked into place with a sickening clarity. He turned his gaze to his own hand again, the hand that had almost touched. His throat worked. Natalie's shoulders sagged a tiny release that looked like her body finally letting itself believe what she already knew. Tears welled in her eyes. Not soft tears, not sentimental. The kind that came from surviving something you can barely name. Mercer's face drained of color. The Marine tightened his hold and shifted his stance from restraint to control. "Sir," the Marine said to Mercer, voice cold, "you are not going anywhere." Mercer's lips parted. A sound came out that was almost a laugh, then died. He glanced toward the stairwell, calculating. His body twitched. Natalie saw it. "Watch him," she rasped. "He will run." Mercer lunged. He made it 3 steps before 2 Marines moved in unison and drove him to the floor. His suit jacket wrinkled under the force. His cheek hit tile with a dull thud. A shout erupted from the crowd. Security surged forward. The corridor became a knot of bodies and shouted commands. Tom stood rigid, one hand still on his jaw, the other hanging at his side. Fingers curled as if he were holding something invisible. He stared at Natalie on the floor. The guard's knee lifted as the man shifted, uncertain now, shaken by the test result. Natalie drew a breath that trembled. Tom's voice came out hoarse. "You saved me," he said, not as praise, not even as gratitude yet, but as a stunned statement of fact. Natalie blinked hard. "I did not want to hit you," she said, voice breaking. "I had no time." Mercer struggled against the Marine's eyes wild, the polished CEO veneer peeling away. "This is wrong," he snapped, voice cracking. "You do not understand what he did." Tom's head turned slowly toward Mercer. "What are you talking about?" Tom asked. Mercer's breathing was ragged now. Rage and panic fought on his face. His eyes locked on Tom with an intensity that did not belong to strangers in a hospital. "You do not even know me," Mercer hissed. "Of course you do not." The hallway held its breath again, staff pressed against door frames, afraid to move. From inside room 7, Elise's voice rose in a strained cry, then steadied into breathing, coached by someone calm. Life continued on the other side of the door, ignorant of the poison inches away. Tom flinched at the sound. For a moment, his focus split between the delivery room and the floor in front of him. Natalie heard it too. Her eyes squeezed shut briefly, then opened with a fierce determination that had nothing to do with protocol. A doctor moved closer to Tom, voice tight. "Sir, your wife is in active labor. We need to keep this corridor clear." Tom swallowed. His gaze stayed on Mercer. "Clear it," he said, voice firm. "But do not let him out of your hands." The Marine nodded, already calling into his earpiece. Natalie's cuffs were removed by a security supervisor whose hands shook as he fumbled with the latch. "I am sorry," the supervisor said quietly, not meeting her eyes. Natalie pushed herself up slowly, knee aching. She did not stand tall. She stood ready. Mercer's head jerked toward her. His eyes held pure hatred, now stripped of civility. Natalie met his stare without flinching. Hazmat began directing staff away from Mercer's right side, marking the floor, controlling the space like a spill site. Tom stood between 2 worlds. His wife behind one door. The man who tried to kill him on the floor. The nurse who broke his jaw to keep him alive standing unsteadily in front of him. The hospital hallway moments ago, a passageway to a berth, had become a containment zone. A place where trust had turned into evidence. And the roses lay scattered across the floor, bright petals against sterile tile like the only soft thing left in the room. The hazmat technician's words seemed to stain the air. Positive, lethal on contact. For a moment, nobody moved, as if the hallway itself had turned into glass, and one wrong step would shatter it. The ventilation hummed overhead. A monitor beeped somewhere behind a closed door, steady and indifferent. The scattered roses lay on the tile like evidence from a different life. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid stood very still, his hand hovering near his bruised jaw. His eyes were fixed on Julian Mercer, who was pinned face down by 2 Marines. Mercer's suit jacket had ridden up, exposing the pale skin at his lower back. His cheek pressed into the floor. His breathing came fast, angry, disbelieving. "This is a mistake," Mercer said through clenched teeth. The Marine closest to his shoulders did not respond. He tightened his grip fingers, locking around Mercer's arm with a pressure that said the argument was over. Natalie Hart stood on unsteady legs, her knee throbbing, her wrist marked red where the cuff had bitten. The security supervisor who had released her kept murmuring apologies that sounded like static. Natalie barely heard him. Her attention remained on Mercer's right hand, now held away from his body palm, turned upward like a confession. The hazmat team moved with practiced speed. A tech unspooled bright tape from a dispenser and began marking a perimeter on the floor. Another tech produced a sealed bag and guided the Marine to place Mercer's contaminated hand inside it without touching skin. A third tech wiped a section of tile where Mercer had stood and dropped the used swab into a container labeled with sharp black ink. "Everyone who is within arm's reach stays here," the lead tech called out. "No one leaves until we clear contact." A nurse near the wall swallowed hard. A doctor's mouth opened and closed, words failing. Someone in the back whispered a prayer. Another staff member began to cry quietly. Tom turned toward Natalie. His face was still tight from pain, but something in his eyes had shifted into a colder focus. The look was familiar to Marines. It was the look of a man who had found the threat. "Who authorized the hazmat call?" Tom asked. A charge nurse stepped forward, voice shaky. "I did, sir," as soon as she screamed contamination. Tom nodded once. He looked down the hallway toward room 7, then back to Mercer. "My wife is in active labor," Tom said, voice rough. "I need access to her room." The charge nurse hesitated, torn between medical priority and the containment zone now forming around them. The lead hazmat tech answered before she could. "We can clear a path that avoids the contaminated area," the tech said. But he does not move. Tom looked at the Marine holding Mercer. "Do not let him out of your hands." "Yes, sir," the Marine replied. Mercer lifted his head a fraction, eyes wild, and sneered at Tom. "You cannot walk away from this, not after what you did." Tom's jaw tightened. "I have no idea who you are." Mercer's laughter was short and broken. "Of course you do not." The sound of Elisa's voice rose from behind the door of room 7, strained and rhythmic as she fought through a contraction. Tom flinched at it, his face twisting with helplessness. The hallway was full of bodies and uniforms, and still he could not get to her fast enough. Natalie took a step closer to Tom, keeping her voice low, not because she feared being overheard, but because the space between them suddenly felt sacred. "Go," she said. "They have him." Tom studied her for a beat. The bruise along his jaw was already darkening. His eyes flicked to her knuckles, faintly reddened. Then he looked back at Mercer, then at the door to room 7. "You better be right," Tom said quietly. Natalie met his gaze without blinking. "I am." Tom nodded once, as if that was all the permission he needed to move. The hazmat team shifted, creating a narrow lane along the far wall away from where Mercer had stood. A Marine stepped ahead of Tom, scanning the corridor and doorways. Another followed behind, close enough to shield him if someone else decided to turn a hospital into a battlefield. Tom stepped around the roses. One crushed under his shoe. He did not notice. Natalie watched him go. Breath caught in her throat because she understood something he did not yet fully grasp. The poison was not just about him. It was about timing. It was about taking a man from a woman at the exact moment she needed him. Natalie's hands trembled. She forced them to still by pressing her fingers against her thigh. Mercer's eyes tracked Tom until the doors to the deeper unit swallowed him. Then Mercer twisted his head toward Natalie, hatred sharpening his features. "You," he spat. Natalie did not answer. She watched the hazmat tech seal another evidence bag. The security supervisor approached her again, voice low. "Ma'am, we need you to come with me." Natalie looked at him. "I'm not leaving this floor until he is in custody." "He is in custody," the supervisor said. His voice broke on the words. "Federal is already en route." Natalie turned her head toward the nurse's station. Devin, the unit clerk, stood behind the desk, pale as paper. His phone was still in his hand. The screen glowed. He stared at it as if it had become a weapon. Natalie took a slow breath and walked toward him. Devin's eyes flicked up and met hers, then dropped immediately. His throat bobbed. "Natalie," he whispered, barely audible. Natalie stopped at the edge of the desk, keeping her voice calm, not accusing, simply steady. "Who are you texting?" she asked. Devin's lips parted. Nothing came out. His fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. The security supervisor noticed the exchange and stiffened. "Devin," he said sharply. "What is going on?" Devin's eyes darted toward Mercer on the floor, then toward Natalie, then toward the corridor where Tom had gone. "I did not know," Devin said suddenly, voice breaking. "I swear I did not know what it was." Natalie's stomach tightened. The supervisor stepped closer. "What did you do?" Devin swallowed. Tears sprang to his eyes. "He asked me to watch the cameras," he said. "He said it was VIP coordination. He said security needed timing. He paid me." The supervisor's face went hard. "He paid you to do what?" Devin shook his head violently. "Just a text when the Admiral walked in. That was it. I thought it was for a greeting. I thought he wanted to make a good impression." Natalie stared at Devin. The unit felt suddenly colder. The supervisor took Devin's phone out of his hand and held it up. "Unlock it." Devin's hand shook as he typed. On the screen were the messages. Short, clinical. "Admiral entering. Admiral in elevator. Admiral on 4th floor." Natalie closed her eyes for a beat. She exhaled slowly. The supervisor looked at her, voice low. "You need to tell me who you are." Natalie opened her eyes. Her voice stayed even, but there was a tension under it now, an old tension. "I used to work chemical response," she said, "before nursing." The supervisor blinked, like hazmat. Natalie shook her head once. "Not like this." Mercer twisted under the Marines and barked, "She is lying. She is unstable. She hit a flag officer." The Marine pressed Mercer's cheek harder into the floor. "Be quiet." Mercer laughed again, breathless and jagged. "You cannot make me quiet." The sound of sirens rose from outside, approaching fast. A woman in a dark suit and a man in tactical gear appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving with purpose. Behind them came 2 more agents' badges clipped to their belts, eyes scanning. The woman flashed credentials at the security supervisor. "FBI, I am Special Agent Mara Velez." The man beside her did not speak. He simply took in the scene, the tape lines on the floor. The hazmat suits, the Marines holding a man in a tailored suit face down. Agent Velez's gaze landed on Mercer. "Julian Mercer," she said, voice flat. "You are under arrest." Mercer's face turned toward her, eyes burning. "For what?" Velez looked at the hazmat tech. The tech held up the analyzer readout and a sealed evidence bag. "Attempted murder," Velez said. Mercer's mouth opened, then shut. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might faint. Then he gathered himself, rage rebuilding. "This is ridiculous," Mercer snapped. "I will have your badge." Velez did not react. She nodded to the man in tactical gear. "Bag his hands," she said. Mercer's right palm was already isolated. A second containment bag went over his left, more precaution than necessity. The agents moved quickly, snapping cuffs onto his wrists. Mercer's control finally cracked. He surged upward against the Marines, shouting, "You do not understand what he did. He ruined my family." Tom was gone down the corridor, out of reach. Mercer's voice chased him anyway, echoing off tile. "He destroyed everything," Mercer yelled. Natalie watched Agent Velez's eyes flick briefly toward her. Assessment, calculation, questions. Velez stepped closer to Natalie, lowering her voice. "You were the one who raised the alarm," she said. Natalie nodded once. "How did you know?" Velez asked. Natalie held her gaze. "Because I could smell it." Velez's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "That is going to require explanation." Natalie's throat tightened. "I know." Velez turned to the security supervisor. "I need the nurse separated from the crowd. Quiet room, no contact with media." The supervisor nodded quickly. Mercer was hauled upright. His suit was wrinkled, his tie skewed his face pale. He looked less like a CEO now and more like a man caught in his own reflection. As they moved him down the hall, Mercer's eyes locked onto Natalie. "You ruined it," he hissed. Natalie did not flinch. She watched him go until the agents and Marines swallowed him. Then she let her shoulders drop a fraction and the tremor in her hands returned. In room 7. Elise cried out again, voice rising, then breaking into a gasp. A doctor's voice responded, calm but urgent. Natalie turned towards the door. She could not go in. The unit needed her elsewhere, and still her body leaned toward that room, as if pulled by something human. A nurse rushed by carrying supplies. "Pressure is climbing," the nurse said to another. "Doctor wants anesthesia." Natalie's stomach tightened further. She pictured Elise alone, fighting, not knowing the hallway had nearly stolen her husband. Natalie followed the security supervisor into a small conference room off the main corridor. The door closed behind them, muffling the unit's noise. For the first time in minutes, the quiet hit her like a wave. She sat down hard in a chair. Her knee ached, her wrist throbbed, her knuckles pulsed. Her breath came uneven. The supervisor hovered awkwardly, still shaken. "I am sorry," he said again. Natalie stared at the table. "I need water," she said. He nodded and hurried out. When the door clicked shut, Natalie placed her palms flat on the table and stared at them. She could still feel the moment before the punch, the inches of air, the weight of choice. Her jaw trembled. She swallowed hard and forced her breathing to slow in through the nose, out through the mouth. The same coaching she gave patients, the same trick that had kept her alive in other corridors other nights. A soft knock came at the door. Agent Velez stepped in alone. She closed the door behind her, then took the chair across from Natalie. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence settle. Then she spoke. "Tell me about your background," Velez said. Natalie's throat tightened. "I was Navy," Natalie said quietly. Velez's eyebrows rose slightly. "You were in uniform." Natalie nodded. "Chemical response," Natalie added. "Specialized." Velez leaned forward a fraction. "You are telling me you smelled a contact poison." Natalie kept her eyes on the table. "Yes." Velez studied her. "What kind?" Natalie lifted her gaze slowly. "Synthetic," she said. "Organophosphate base with a carrier that sticks to skin." Velez's expression remained controlled, but her eyes flicked with interest. "How do you know that?" Natalie did not answer immediately. She could hear Elise's cries through the wall, muffled but present. She could hear a cart rolling past wheels squeaking. She took a breath. "I have hyperosmia," she said. "Extreme sensitivity. They trained me to use it." Velez's gaze held steady. "Who trained you?" Natalie's voice stayed quiet. "A unit that does not like paperwork." Velez nodded as if she understood the shape of that answer. "Can you prove it?" Velez asked. Natalie exhaled. "Yes." Velez reached into her jacket and produced a phone. She typed quickly, then held it to her ear. She spoke in a low tone, using a name Natalie had not heard in years. Natalie watched her, the muscles in her neck tightening. Velez ended the call and set the phone down. "My contact says your file exists," Velez said. "Your discharge was honorable. Your role was not ceremonial." Natalie felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but a fraction of it. Velez watched her closely. "You understand why we needed to confirm?" Natalie nodded. "I do." Velez's voice softened slightly, still professional. "Your intervention prevented a lethal transfer. Hazmat confirms his palm was coated with a compound that would have killed quickly." Natalie's eyes stung. She blinked hard. "Did it get on the Admiral?" "No," Velez said. The swab was clean. Natalie let out a shaky breath. Her shoulders sagged. Velez leaned back in her chair. "Mercer is talking," she said. Natalie's head lifted. "He is angry," Velez continued. "He is insisting this was justice." Natalie's jaw tightened. "Justice is court," she said quietly. Velez watched her. "He says the Admiral destroyed his family." Natalie's mind flicked back to Devon's confession, to the messages, to the calm precision of Mercer's trap. "Does the Admiral even know him?" Natalie asked. Velez's lips pressed together. "Not personally," she said. Natalie stared at her hands again. Her knuckles were bruising. The punch that had saved a life felt heavier now, not lighter. Outside the conference room, footsteps rushed. A doctor's voice carried urgency. "We need anesthesia in 7, now." Natalie's heart kicked. Velez stood. "Stay here," she said. Natalie pushed to her feet anyway, knee protesting. "His wife," she said, voice tight. "Is she okay?" Velez paused at the door. "Active labor. Complications possible. The Admiral is being routed to her." Natalie nodded. She sat back down, but her body remained tense, ready. The door opened again a minute later. This time it was a Marine, breathless face, grim. "Agent," he said to Velez, who had returned with the supervisor. "Sir needs you." Velez's eyes narrowed. "Which sir?" "Vice Admiral Kincaid," the Marine said. "He wants to know what Mercer said." Velez looked at Natalie. "You stay," she repeated. Natalie nodded. Her eyes followed Velez out. Time stretched. Natalie listened to the sounds beyond the wall. Nurses calling for supplies. The squeak of a cart. Elise's voice rising and falling like a tide. A doctor giving calm instructions that tightened at the edges. Natalie's mind kept returning to the moment before impact, the tiny gap between hands, the slick wrongness on Mercer's skin. She pictured Tom's face when he realized. "You saved me." She wondered what it meant to save a stranger with violence, and why her hand still shook. The conference room door opened again. A different nurse stepped in, face flushed, eyes bright. "Natalie," she said. "They are taking her for a C-section." Natalie's stomach dropped. "Elise." The nurse nodded. Pressure spiked. Baby's heart rate dipped. "They are moving fast." Natalie stood without thinking. "Is the Admiral with her?" "I saw him," the nurse said. "He is outside the OR doors." Security cleared him through. Natalie exhaled. Her chest felt too tight. The nurse hesitated. "Are you okay?" Natalie forced her voice steady. "Go," she said. "They need you." The nurse nodded and hurried out. Natalie sat back down, but her legs would not stop trembling. In her mind, she saw Elise's face, sweat, and fear whispering, "He promised me." Natalie pictured Tom standing outside sterile doors, bruised jaw flowers crushed somewhere on the floor behind him, trying to be present for a moment that could not be paused. A half-hour later, the hallway sounds changed. A shift in tempo. Less chaotic, more controlled. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, not because it is over, but because everyone is holding their breath. Natalie listened. A door opened in the distance. Footsteps ran past. A voice said, "Clear." Then, faintly unmistakably, a newborn's cry rose and cut through everything. Natalie's eyes closed. Her throat tightened. A cry meant breath. Breath meant life. She pressed her palm to the table, grounding herself in the hard surface. A knock came softer this time. The security supervisor opened the door and stepped aside. Vice Admiral Kincaid stood there. He looked different. The bruise on his jaw was visible, purple and angry. But his eyes were not angry. They were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His uniform collar was slightly out of place, as if he had been grabbed by the moment and shaken. He held himself still like a man who did not trust his own emotions not to spill. Natalie stood quickly. "Sir," she began. Tom lifted a hand, stopping her. "Sit," he said quietly. Natalie hesitated, then sat back down. Tom stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The conference room light made the bruise look worse. He looked at her for a long beat. Then he spoke. "She is alive," he said. Natalie's breath released in a shaky exhale. "And my daughter," Tom added. His voice caught slightly on the word. "She is alive." Natalie's eyes stung again. "I am glad," she whispered. Tom took a step closer, then stopped, as if unsure how to stand in front of the woman who had hit him. "I have been punched before," he said, voice low. "Just not by someone trying to keep me alive." Natalie swallowed. "I'm sorry." Tom shook his head once. "Do not," he said. Natalie's fingers tightened on the edge of the chair. "I did not have time." "I know," Tom said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hand was steady now. He turned the screen toward Natalie. A photo filled it. A newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket, cheeks, flushed mouth slightly open in sleep. a tiny fist pressed against her own face. Natalie stared, breath caught as if looking at something holy. Tom's voice softened. Grace Hope Kincaid. Natalie's lips parted. Hope, she said without thinking. Tom nodded. My wife chose it years ago, he said, before we were sure we would ever have a child. Natalie's gaze stayed on the photo. Her eyes blurred with tears. Tom watched her, then spoke again, voice quieter, heavier. They told me her blood pressure was climbing, he said. They said she might go under without family in the room. Natalie's chest tightened again. Tom's jaw worked. I stood outside that door, and all I could think was that she had begged me not to miss this. She had begged me. Natalie looked up at him. Tom's eyes were wet. He did not wipe them. And then I thought about the hallway, he said. I thought about my hand reaching out. I thought about the way you screamed, like you were watching me step off a cliff. Natalie's voice broke. I could not let him touch you. Tom nodded, swallowing hard. You saved more than my life, he said. You saved my wife from hearing a nurse tell her husband died in a corridor while she was fighting to bring our child into the world. Natalie's shoulders trembled. She clenched her hands in her lap. Tom took a slow breath. They are going to ask you questions, he said. A lot of them. Natalie nodded. I know. Tom's gaze sharpened again, the Admiral returning, but gentler now. And I am going to answer questions too, he said. About Mercer, about the operation, about whatever he thinks I did. Natalie watched him. Did you? She asked softly. No, his brother. Tom's face tightened. I knew of the network, he said. I knew of Dragon. I knew the operation had collateral. His eyes flicked away briefly, then back. I did not know his brother's name. Natalie nodded slowly. Tom's mouth tightened, anger simmering. Mercer's not the only one, he said quietly. Natalie looked at him. Tom's voice lowered. Velez told me there were files, he said. Other targets. Natalie's stomach turned. Tom held her gaze. This man was not stopping with me. Natalie felt cold spread through her limbs. The hallway had not been a single act of revenge. It had been a pattern waiting to unfold. Tom slipped his phone back into his pocket. He hesitated, then extended his left hand toward Natalie, palm open. Natalie stared at it. The gesture carried weight now. Tom's voice was soft. Safe hand, he said, almost a grim attempt at humor. Natalie's throat tightened. She reached out and shook his hand gently. Tom's grip was firm but careful, like he understood she was still shaking. Thank you, he said. Natalie's eyes closed for a beat. You are welcome, she whispered. Tom stepped back. I need to go back to my wife, he said. Natalie nodded. He opened the door, paused, and glanced over his shoulder. They will try to make sense of what you did, he said. They will talk about protocol. Natalie held his gaze. Tom's voice tightened. Protocol did not carry my daughter's first breath. You did. Then he left the door, clicking shut behind him. Natalie sat very still. The room felt too quiet without him. Outside, Agent Velez moved through the corridor with a folder tucked under her arm, speaking to another agent in clipped sentences. The hazmat team continued swabbing surfaces and sealing bags. Devon sat on the floor near the nurse's station, head in his hands, sobbing quietly, while an officer took his statement. On the 5th floor, 2 FBI agents entered Julian Mercer's office. The awards on the wall looked different under their flashlights. The photos looked like props. One agent opened a desk drawer and found the leather notebook immediately, as if Mercer had wanted it discovered. The pages were filled with dates and routes, not just one night, but weeks, months, careful tracking. The agent's finger traced a line written in neat ink. Handshake location. 4th floor corridor. 10 feet from nurse's station. Optimal foot traffic. He looked up at his partner. He rehearsed. His partner moved to a cabinet and tried the lock. It held. He pulled out a key ring taken from Mercer's pocket at booking and tried keys until one turned. The cabinet opened. Inside were containers of lab-grade materials, gloves, droppers, sealed vials, the kind of equipment that belonged in a controlled laboratory, not behind a CEO's suits. A false panel at the back of the cabinet shifted when the agent pressed it. Behind it sat a compact synthesis setup, clean, organized, obsessively maintained. The partner's voice went flat. He was making it here. Another agent at the desk pulled Mercer's laptop from a bag and began scrolling. Purchase histories. Encrypted messages. Strings of transactions. A pattern of transfers that looked like ordinary payments until you knew what you were looking for. Crypto, the agent muttered. His partner leaned in. To who? The agent pointed at the screen. Suppliers, he said. Overseas, no extradition. A third agent opened a file folder on the shelf labeled with a simple printed tag. Kincaid. Inside were photos of Tom leaving the base, Tom entering restaurants Tom and Elise in a clinic waiting room. The agent's jaw tightened. He tracked the wife, too. Another folder sat beside it. Different name. Another folder. Another. The agent laid them out on the desk, each one neat, each one heavy. In the conference room on the 4th floor, Natalie felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. She did not reach for it immediately. Her hands were still shaking, and she did not trust herself not to drop it. When she finally checked, it was a message from the nursing administrator. Do not leave the floor. Board wants a statement. Natalie stared at the words, then set the phone down. Her stomach tightened again. The board, lawyers, questions. The part of the story that lived in paperwork and consequences. A knock came at the door. Agent Velez stepped in, face composed, eyes tired. We pulled evidence from his office, Velez said. Natalie stood. The file, she said. Velez nodded once. Natalie's voice went tight. How many? Velez looked at her for a beat, then answered carefully. Enough, she said. Natalie swallowed hard. Velez's gaze softened slightly. You did the right thing by not letting him touch the Admiral, she said, then caught herself and returned to professional tone. Your action prevented a fatal exposure. That is documented. Natalie nodded, but the words did not land as comfort. They landed as weight. Velez glanced toward the door. There is more, she said. We need your full statement timeline, anything you noticed. People. Smells. Behavior. Natalie's eyes flicked to the hallway in her mind. Devon's nervous tapping. Mercer's too smooth smile. The way Mercer had tried to wipe his palm. I will tell you everything Natalie said. Velez nodded. She handed Natalie a card. If anyone contacts you directly, she said, media outsiders, anyone, call me. Natalie took the card, fingers trembling. Velez turned to leave, then paused and looked back. The hospital board is asking to meet you in the morning, she said. Natalie's chest tightened. Velez's expression was unreadable. They want to understand how a nurse saw something their systems did not. Natalie nodded slowly, and in the quiet that followed she could hear the labor and delivery unit returning to its rhythm. Nurses speaking softly, a cart rolling, a baby crying, then calming. Down the hall, Tom Kincaid stood outside an operating room door, pressing his bruised jaw with his fingertips, listening for his wife's voice holding the fact of his daughter's existence like a steady flame inside his chest. And 2 floors above the trophies on Julian Mercer's wall gleamed under an FBI flashlight reflecting a life built on trust and an office that had quietly become a weapon. Morning came in pale slices through the hospital blinds, the kind of light that made everything look newly scrubbed and strangely innocent. The 4th floor still smelled like disinfectant and warmed plastic, but the sharp chemical edge from the night before had been sealed away under tape bags and paperwork. Security guards stood at the entrances now with clipboards and tired eyes. Nurses moved quieter than usual, as if their footsteps might wake something they did not want to wake. Natalie Hart had not slept. She sat alone in a small staff break room with a paper cup of coffee cooling between her hands. Her scrubs were torn at the knee and faintly stained from the floor. Her right wrist still carried the red imprint of cuffs. When she lifted her hands, her knuckles looked swollen bruises blooming under the skin like ink. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past the open door, paused, then gave her a small nod that felt like respect. Natalie returned it without smiling. Her phone buzzed again, but she did not look at it. She stared at the steam rising from the coffee, watching it twist and vanish, thinking about how a thing could be invisible and still be deadly, thinking about how close skin had come to skin. The door opened softly. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid stepped in. His uniform was still on, but the sharpness had dulled at the edges. His collar sat slightly off, and the bruise along his jaw was darker now, purple spread like a storm cloud. He moved like a man whose body had not caught up to what had happened, like he was still half in that hallway, half in an operating suite, listening for a newborn cry. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment without speaking, looking at Natalie's hands. Natalie rose quickly. "Sir," she began. Tom lifted one hand. "Sit," he said. Natalie hesitated, then sat again. Tom took the chair across from her. He did not sit like a superior. He sat like a man who had run out of distance to hide behind. "I saw my daughter," he said. Natalie let out a breath she did not realize she was holding. "How is Elise?" Tom's eyes flicked downward, then back. "Alive," he said, exhausted. "Angry." Natalie nodded once. "That makes sense." Tom stared at her for a long beat, then a corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, more like recognition of the absurd. "She asked why I looked like I picked a fight in a hallway," he said. Natalie's throat tightened. "What did you tell her?" Tom's voice softened. "I told her a nurse hit me." Natalie winced. "I told her it kept me breathing," Tom added. Natalie's eyes stung. She blinked hard and looked down at her cup. Tom leaned forward slightly. "The hospital board wants to meet you this morning," he said. Natalie's fingers tightened around the paper cup. "To fire me." Tom shook his head once. "No." Natalie looked up. Tom's gaze held steady. "They want to understand how a nurse saw something their systems did not. They want to understand why their CEO had a contact poison on his hand in labor and delivery." Natalie swallowed. "I did not want to be understood last night. I just needed him to stop." Tom nodded. "I know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. He turned the screen toward her. The photo of Grace Hope filled the display, swaddled cheeks, flushed mouth slightly open like she was mid-dream. Natalie's breath caught all over again, softer this time. Tom watched her reaction. "Elise named her Hope before we knew we would ever get to use the name," he said quietly. "She told me it was foolish. She said she did not care." Natalie's voice came out thin. She was right. Tom exhaled. "You are going to have people ask you questions that sound like accusations," he said. "You are going to feel like you are on trial for saving my life." Natalie met his eyes. "I have been questioned before." Tom's brow lifted a fraction, then he nodded, like he understood the shape of that statement. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood. "I need to be with my wife," he said. "But I am not letting you stand alone in front of lawyers and administrators after what you did." Natalie's stomach tightened. "So you do not owe me anything." Tom looked at her jaw, tight bruise, pulling at his expression. "That is not true," he said. "And I am done being the kind of man who owes something and walks away." He opened the door, paused, then looked back. "I will see you in that room," he said. When he left, the break room felt emptier than it should have. Natalie sat very still for a few seconds, then stood and walked to the sink. She turned on cold water and ran her hands under it. The bruise on her knuckles darkened when the skin cooled. She flexed her fingers slowly, feeling the ache in the joints. The door opened again. A nurse she barely knew stepped in holding a garment bag and a pair of flat shoes. "Someone told me you might need these," the nurse said, voice gentle. Natalie stared. "What are they?" "My clothes," the nurse said. "I keep a spare set in my car for double shifts. They are not fancy, but they are clean." Natalie's throat tightened. She took the bag carefully like it might break. "Thank you," she said. The nurse nodded once. "My sister had a baby here last year," she said. "If someone had tried to take her husband from her in the hallway, I would want a nurse like you to notice." Natalie blinked hard and nodded. The nurse left. Natalie opened the garment bag. A simple navy blouse, gray slacks, a cardigan. Ordinary clothes that suddenly felt like armor. She changed in the staff restroom. Under the fluorescent lights, she looked at her face in the mirror. Her hair had come loose in the back. Her eyes were rimmed red from exhaustion. When she lifted her hands to pin her hair again, she saw the faint bruising at her jaw where the guard's knee had pressed her down. She finished and stepped out, walking toward the administrative wing. The conference room on the 4th floor had been rearranged. The long table was polished. Bottles of water sat at each seat. A small stack of documents rested at the head of the table, perfectly aligned, like the room was trying to pretend nothing messy had happened. 3 board members waited inside with 2 attorneys. A woman in her 60s sat at the center posture, straight hair, silver, and cut with precision. She wore a dark blazer and a watch that looked expensive without trying. Her eyes tracked Natalie as she entered. "Ms. Hart," the woman said, "please sit." Natalie took a chair halfway down the table, hands folded tightly in front of her. The woman did not introduce herself at first. She simply studied Natalie, then nodded to one of the attorneys. "We will keep this brief," the attorney said. The silver-haired woman leaned forward slightly. "We are going to start with the obvious," she said. "Last night you struck Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid in the face in a hospital hallway." Natalie's fingers tightened. The woman continued. "You did so on hospital property, in a clinical area, in front of staff and patients." Natalie held her gaze. "Yes." The woman paused. "Explain." Natalie inhaled slowly. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She spoke the way she had learned to speak when truth needed to survive scrutiny. "I detected a synthetic compound on Dr. Mercer," she said. "A contact delivery agent. It was on his right palm." He extended his hand toward the Vice Admiral. The Vice Admiral moved to shake it. There was not time to warn him verbally and stop contact. One attorney scribbled something. Another watched Natalie's face. The woman at the head of the table asked, "How did you detect it?" Natalie's throat tightened. "I have a heightened olfactory ability," she said, "and prior training in chemical threat recognition." The silver-haired woman held very still. "Prior training where?" Natalie's jaw clenched. "Navy," she said, "a specialized unit." The attorney cleared his throat. "We will need verification." The door opened. Agent Maraveles stepped in, badge clipped to her belt, expression composed. Behind her came a man with a military posture and a folder under his arm. "Verification is already in progress," Veles said calmly. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "Department confirmation. Honorable discharge. Role classification noted." The board members glanced at the document. The room changed slightly, skepticism shifting into something closer to realization. The silver-haired woman's voice softened by a fraction. "Why are you a nurse now?" Natalie did not look away. "Because I wanted to save people in a way I could live with," she said. The woman nodded once as if she understood more than she was saying. One of the attorneys spoke again. "In the immediate aftermath, you shouted instructions to test Dr. Mercer's right palm." Hazmat confirmed the presence of a highly toxic compound. Natalie nodded, "Yes." The silver-haired woman leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. "Last night, you committed assault," she said. "You also prevented a murder in this institution. You exposed catastrophic failures in our security and oversight." Natalie's mouth went dry. The woman's gaze held steady. "We have a proposal." Natalie's heart thudded in her chest. A different board member. A man with a clipped beard and tired eyes slid a folder across the table toward Natalie. Natalie did not open it immediately. The silver-haired woman continued, "We are creating a new position effective immediately. Director of Clinical Threat Assessment and Safety." Natalie's eyes lifted. "I do not understand." The bearded board member spoke, voice blunt. "We did not have a plan for what happened last night. We did not have training. We did not have systems. We had blind spots big enough for a CEO to build a lab in his office. That ends." Natalie's fingers hovered over the folder. The silver-haired woman added, "This role includes authority to halt access to clinical zones when safety is compromised. It includes training oversight. It includes coordination with federal agencies." One of the attorneys nodded. "And it includes legal protection, defense of others, federal confirmation. We will not pursue criminal charges." Natalie's breath left her in a shaky exhale. The room blurred slightly. She looked down and finally opened the folder. Inside were job terms, salary figures, responsibilities. It was too much to absorb at once. Natalie looked up again. "Why would you offer this to me?" she asked, voice quiet. "When I struck a patient's family member in your hallway." The silver-haired woman's gaze flicked toward the door where Vice Admiral Kincaid stepped in. Tom's bruise was visible. His uniform was crisp again, but his eyes were tired. He did not sit. He stood behind Natalie's chair, not looming, simply present. The board chair nodded once toward him. "Because the Vice Admiral requested it," she said. "And because our attorneys agree he is correct." Tom spoke, voice steady. "I did not come here for optics," he said. "I came because I stood in that hallway and almost became a corpse in front of labor and delivery." That nurse stopped it. One attorney shifted uncomfortably. Tom continued. "Hospitals are not just places of healing. They are places where trust is automatic. That is why they are vulnerable." Natalie stared straight ahead. Her hands were still folded tightly, knuckles bruised under the skin. Tom's voice lowered. "This institution failed to detect a threat wearing a suit and a badge. Ms. Hart detected it because she has skills and training that are rare. The right response is not to punish her for acting with urgency. The right response is to build a system that does not require a punch to stop a murder." The board chair looked at Natalie. "Do you want this role?" she asked. Natalie swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of the night pressing against her ribs. She could feel her old life stirring the part of her that had tried to bury itself under scrubs and night shifts. She could feel the fear that accepting would pull her back into a world where danger lived in invisible things. She looked up at Tom's bruise, then at the board chair, then at Agent Velez. "Yes," Natalie said, "with one condition." The bearded board member's eyebrows rose. "Name it." Natalie's voice steadied. "Training is not just for security," she said. "Everyone sees the hospital. Nurses, doctors, janitors, transport maintenance clerks. Everyone who walks these halls can notice something wrong. I want them trained too. I want permission to teach them without making them feel foolish." The board chair's expression shifted into the first hint of approval. "We were hoping you would say that," she said. Natalie's breath trembled as she exhaled. Tom placed a hand lightly on the back of her chair, not touching her shoulder, not asking for gratitude, simply acknowledging that she was not alone in the room. Agent Velez cleared her throat. "One more thing," she said. She looked at the board chair. "Your institution is under federal review. The attempted murder charge is not the only concern." The board chair's jaw tightened. "We understand." Velez continued. "Dr. Mercer accessed protected medical information. He embezzled funds. He built a chemical operation inside the administrative wing. Someone allowed him into leadership." The bearded board member's face went pale. Velez's gaze did not soften. "We are going to find out how." The meeting ended with signatures and quiet handshakes. Natalie left the room holding the folder like it weighed more than paper. Tom walked beside her in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. "Elise asked about you," he said. Natalie's steps slowed. "What did you tell her?" "That you saved my life," Tom said. "That you did it the only way you could." Natalie's voice came out small. "What did she say?" Tom's eyes softened. "She said she wants to meet you when she is able," he said. "She said she owes you her husband." Natalie swallowed hard. "She does not owe me anything," Natalie said. Tom did not argue. He simply nodded, then turned toward the labor and delivery wing. Natalie watched him go, then turned toward her new office, which did not yet feel like hers. It was a small room near administration, freshly cleared a desk and a chair, and an empty shelf. Someone had placed a nameplate on the desk. It read, "Director of Clinical Threat Assessment and Safety." Natalie ran her fingers along the edge of it as if testing whether it was real. Her phone rang. Agent Velez's name lit the screen. Natalie answered. "Velez." Velez's voice was crisp. "We have enough to charge Mercer with attempted murder, chemical weapons, possession, fraud, and financial crimes," she said. "But there is more. He falsified portions of his background file. Natalie's stomach tightened again. Velez continued. And the people who hired him are not clean. Natalie closed her eyes briefly. How bad? Velez's pause was short. Bad enough that you should expect cameras, she said. Do not speak to them. Natalie exhaled. I will not. Velez added. We also recovered multiple target files. Other names, other plans. Natalie's hand tightened around the phone. He would have done it again. Yes, Velez said. You stopped the first attempt. That matters. Natalie hung up and sat down at the desk staring at the blank wall. In the hallway outside, staff moved with an unfamiliar tension. Conversations dropped into whispers when a stranger walked by. People checked doors twice. A nurse paused at the elevator and studied the ceiling camera like she was seeing it for the first time. By noon, news vans lined the street outside Seaside Regional. Helicopters cut slow circles overhead. The hospital issued a statement that said little and meant less. Staff were instructed to keep their heads down and their answers shorter than their breath. Natalie walked through it all with her ID badge swinging against her blouse. She did not feel important. She felt exposed. In the afternoon, she returned to labor and delivery for a brief check-in. The unit was quieter now. The hallway where roses had scattered looked clean again, but Natalie could still see it as it had been. She could still hear the crack of impact like it lived in the walls. She stood near the nurse's station when Elise's door opened. A nurse stepped out carrying a clipboard. Behind her, Tom appeared in the doorway holding a small bundle. Natalie's breath caught. Tom looked at her and hesitated, then walked toward her slowly. In his arms, Grace Hope Kincaid slept, swaddled, tight face scrunched like she was arguing with dreams. Elise lay in the bed behind him, hair damp, cheeks pale. Her eyes found Natalie, and the look in them was not polite gratitude. It was something deeper, something that comes from realizing how narrow the line is between having a family and losing it. Tom leaned down and whispered something to Elise. Elise nodded, then lifted her hand slightly palm open, invitation without words. Natalie stepped closer. Slow, careful, like she was approaching a fragile thing she did not deserve to touch. Elise's voice was hoarse. You are the nurse, she said. Natalie nodded, yes. Elise swallowed hard. You hit my husband. Natalie's cheeks warmed, yes. Elise stared at her for a long beat. Then her lips trembled into something that was almost a smile. Thank you, Elise said. Natalie's throat tightened. I am sorry for how it happened. Elise's eyes glistened. Do not be, she said. If you had not, I would have heard a doctor say my husband died while I was being cut open. Natalie blinked hard and nodded. Tom shifted Grace slightly, then held the baby so Natalie could see her face. Elise's voice softened. We named her Hope, she said. And I did not think the name would be tested on the first night. Natalie reached out instinctively, then stopped. May I? Elise nodded. Natalie touched Grace's tiny fist with one finger. The baby's hand curled, reflexively gripping skin with surprising strength. Natalie felt her chest ache with a sudden quiet intensity. The grip was real. The breath was real. The life was real. Tom's voice was low. I will not forget that hallway, he said. Natalie looked up at him. Neither will I. Tom nodded once. Then we make sure the hospital does not forget either. Over the next weeks, the hospital became two places at once. To the public, it was still a medical center with cheerful murals and polite staff. Behind the scenes, it became a crime scene that refused to stop being a crime scene. Federal agents moved through administrative offices with boxes. Computers were seized. Financial records were copied. Interviews ran long into the night. A board member resigned publicly and denied everything privately. Another refused to speak without counsel. The hospital's hiring committee was questioned until their answers began to contradict each other. Natalie sat through meetings that felt like interrogation rooms. She spoke in measured sentences. She avoided embellishment. She described what she had smelled where she had stood, what she had seen Devon doing, the way Mercer's hand had moved toward his jacket. She watched agents write it all down as if turning the night into something that could fit in a file. Devon's role became clear quickly. He had been paid. He had been used. He had not understood what he was enabling, but the fact of his involvement was still there, written in text messages and timestamps. Natalie saw him once in the hallway outside HR, face-drawn eyes swollen from crying. He looked at her like she might hate him. Natalie did not. "You should have told someone," she said quietly. Devon's voice broke. "I thought it was nothing," he whispered. "I thought it was just VIP nonsense. I'm sorry." Natalie held his gaze. "Be sorry in a way that changes your choices," she said. Devon nodded, tears spilling, then looked away. Natalie's new job began before the title could settle. She met with security. She met with nursing leadership. She met with maintenance. She walked entrance points and studied where a person could pause without being noticed. She asked uncomfortable questions about badge access and camera blind spots, and who could enter labor and delivery after hours. At first, people resisted. Some called it paranoia. Some called it an overreaction. Some complained that the hospital needed to feel welcoming, not militarized. Natalie listened without defensiveness. Then she spoke. "In that hallway, a man in a suit almost killed a vice admiral with a handshake," she said. "He did it because he understood what you are saying. He understood that people want hospitals to feel safe. He used that desire as cover." No one argued after that. Training sessions started small groups of 10 or 15. Natalie stood at the front of a conference room with a whiteboard and a table of ordinary items. Gloves, hand sanitizer, a sealed evidence bag, a photo of the taped-off corridor printed and pinned like a reminder. She did not perform. She taught. "Most threats are not loud," she said to a room full of nurses. "They are quiet. They wear normal faces. They do not rush. They watch." A nurse raised her hand. "How do you tell the difference between anxious and dangerous?" Natalie looked at her. "You do not always," she said, "but you learn patterns. A person who scans exits more than room numbers. A person who carries a bag they do not let go of. A person who waits too close to staff-only areas. A person who touches surfaces without purpose." A doctor in the back crossed his arms. "And what about chemical threats?" Natalie's eyes stayed calm. "You will not smell what I smell," she said. "But you can learn what is normal for your unit. When something is off, you can act without needing a perfect explanation. You call for help. You isolate. You stop contact." A janitor sat in the front row of one session, hands folded on his lap, listening hard. When Natalie described how small actions prevented big harm, he nodded slowly like he had always known that. The hospital installed new controls in stages. Entry points became tighter. Access to sensitive units required a second verification after hours. Financial audits became more frequent and less polite. Administrative offices were searched for unauthorized chemicals and equipment. Natalie insisted on simple things too, not just technology. She asked for a culture shift. "People need permission to speak up," she told the security chief. "They need to know they will not be mocked for being cautious." The security chief, a former police officer with a stiff posture and a tired face, nodded. "We failed at that," he admitted. Natalie looked at him. "Then we stopped failing." Julian Mercer's case moved through federal court with the cold efficiency of paperwork catching up to reality. He sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, hair cut short. The polished CEO was gone. In his place was a man whose eyes looked too empty for someone who had once smiled at nurses in hallways. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the rows. Hospital staff sat with rigid posture. Navy personnel sat in uniform, faces hard. Tom Kincaid sat near the front with Elise beside him. Elise's face was still pale, but her posture was straight, her hand resting on Tom's forearm. She looked at Mercer without blinking. Natalie sat 2 rows back, hands clasped tightly in her lap, jaw set. Agent Velez stood when called, voice steady, describing evidence. She spoke of the compound, the procurement, the hidden lab, the target folders. She did not dramatize. She did not need to. When the prosecutor read charges, the list sounded unreal in that room. Attempted murder of a federal officer, possession of illegal chemical agents, embezzlement, fraud, unauthorized access to protected health information, conspiracy related to additional planned targets. Mercer's attorney stood and began a practice statement about mental strain and grief and a life unraveling. Mercer turned his head slowly and stared forward. When asked for a plea, he spoke before his lawyer could. "Guilty," Mercer said. The word landed heavy. His attorney stiffened, whispering urgently. Mercer did not look at him. "I planned it," Mercer added, voice flat. "I would have succeeded if not for that nurse." Natalie felt a chill run through her arms. Elise's hand tightened on Tom's forearm. The judge's face remained controlled. "You understand what you are admitting," he said. Mercer nodded once. "I waited 8 years," Mercer said. Then his voice cracked slightly and turned sharp. 8 years for him to feel what my family felt. Tom's jaw tightened. The prosecutor called Natalie to the stand. Natalie walked with steady steps, though her knee still ached when she climbed the small stair. She sat, placed her hands on the table, and looked at the attorney, questioning her. She described the hallway without embellishment. The smell, the wrongness, the way Mercer's hand had been positioned, the time window, the decision. The defense attorney tried to frame it as reckless. "You assaulted a vice admiral," he said. Natalie held his gaze. "I interrupted contact with a lethal compound," she replied. "You could have shouted," he pressed. "I did," Natalie said. The sound would not have traveled faster than hands. The attorney tried a different angle. "You claim you detected a synthetic poison by scent alone." Natalie's voice remained even. "I have a heightened olfactory ability and prior training," she said. "That is documented." The defense attorney leaned forward. "And you expect this court to believe you just happened to be present?" Natalie's eyes did not waver. "I was assigned to labor and delivery," she said. "I did not choose to be present. I chose to act." The prosecutor stood again. "Why did you act?" he asked. Natalie's throat tightened briefly. She glanced once toward Elise, then back. "Because a man was about to die in a hallway," she said, "and his wife was in surgery." The courtroom went quiet. Tom testified after. He spoke of the operation that had dismantled Dragon's network. He spoke of legal process of evidence of oversight. He did not sanitize it. He acknowledged that operations had consequences. He also made clear that consequences did not grant permission for murder. "He did not come for justice," Tom said, voice steady. "He came for a spectacle. He came to take my child's first day and turn it into a funeral." Mercer sat without expression. When given a chance to speak at sentencing, he stood slowly. "I do not ask for mercy," Mercer said. His voice was hollow now. "I had 8 years to choose something else." He glanced toward Tom, then toward Elise, then toward Natalie. His eyes did not hold hatred anymore. They held exhaustion. "I wanted him to suffer," Mercer said. "And I made myself into something worse than the men I blamed." He sat down. The judge's voice was measured when he delivered the sentence. The words were calm, but the weight was not. Mercer was sentenced to decades in federal custody with limited possibility of early release. The courtroom reacted in murmurs and breaths. No one celebrated. Elise simply closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked forward again. After court, outside on the courthouse steps, reporters yelled questions. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones hovered. Tom guided Elise through the crowd, one hand protective at her elbow. Natalie walked a few paces behind with Agent Velez at her side. "Do you want to make a statement?" a reporter shouted. Natalie did not stop. Velez answered for her voice, sharp. "No." Another reporter shouted, "Did you really punch a vice admiral?" Natalie kept walking. Her face stayed blank. Tom turned his head slightly toward the crowd and spoke once, voice loud enough to carry. "She saved my life," he said. "That is the only statement that matters." At Seaside Regional, the changes became visible in quiet ways. Not a militarized lobby, not armed guards on every corner, but a tightening of the cracks where Mercer had slipped through. Badges were audited. Vendor access was verified. Anomalous purchases triggered reviews that could not be silenced by titles. The hospital culture shifted toward permission to question. One evening, months later, a visitor arrived at the main entrance, carrying a small cooler bag and insisting he needed to deliver something to a patient. His story changed twice in 2 minutes. He refused to let go of the bag at screening. A security guard trained by Natalie noticed the way the man's eyes kept tracking the doors instead of the desk. The guard did not tackle him. He did not escalate unnecessarily. He stepped back, called his supervisor, and asked the man to wait. When the man bolted, he did not get far. He was stopped outside by police already called in. Inside the bag was a collection of stolen medications and a syringe kit. The man had a warrant for assault in another county. The incident never made national news. It never became a headline. It was simply a threat that did not become a tragedy. Natalie heard about it in a brief report and sat in her office for a long moment afterward staring at the wall. Not because she wanted credit, because she understood what a small decision could prevent. Tom Kincaid began showing up differently too. He visited the hospital not as a VIP with security, but as a father carrying a car seat and moving gently through hallways. He sat beside Elise during follow-up appointments without looking at his phone. He held Grace in waiting rooms and learned how to adjust the straps with clumsy patience. One afternoon, Natalie saw him in the lobby wearing civilian clothes, hair slightly unkempt, a diaper bag slung over his shoulder. The sight was so ordinary, it felt like a miracle. Tom noticed her and walked over Grace tucked against his chest. "She is getting heavy," he said quietly. Natalie's eyes softened. "That is a good problem." Tom nodded. He hesitated, then added, "I filed my retirement papers." Natalie blinked. "You're sure?" Tom's gaze drifted down to Grace's sleeping face. "I am sure," he said. "I spent too long thinking presence was optional." Natalie did not respond with a lecture. She simply nodded. Elise joined them slower now, still healing but stronger. She looked at Natalie with a directness that did not allow distance. "We brought something," Elise said. She handed Natalie a small envelope. Inside was a printed photo of Grace Hope with her eyes open staring at the camera like she had a question. On the back, Elise had written a single line in careful script. "Thank you for letting her have a father." Natalie's throat tightened. She held the photo like it could shatter. "I did not do it alone," Natalie said, voice quiet. Elise's eyes held steady. "You did it first," she replied. Years later, the details of that night remained sharp in Natalie's mind, but they stopped cutting her every time she remembered them. The hallway became a place she could walk through without her body bracing for impact. The smell of disinfectant became just disinfectant again most days. Her office at Seaside Regional filled with training binders, incident reports, and quiet reminders that safety was not a single device, but 1,000 choices made by tired people on long shifts. The nameplate on her desk stayed the same, but the meaning of it deepened. Director of Clinical Threat Assessment and Safety. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit alone and listen to the hospital breathe the distant beeps and footsteps and murmurs, and she would think of the moment her body moved before her mind could explain. She would think of the roses on the floor. She would think of Grace's tiny hand gripping her finger. And she would remember the bruise on Tom's jaw, the look in Elise's eyes, the cold emptiness in Mercer's stare when he realized he had been stopped by someone who refused to look away. On a quiet evening at the Kincaid home, Grace took her first unsteady steps across the living room carpet. Tom crouched with his arms open, laughing softly. Elise stood nearby, one hand over her mouth, eyes wet. Natalie sat on the floor, a few feet away, palms open, ready to catch. Grace wobbled forward, then collapsed into Tom's arms, laughing at her own success. Tom looked up at Natalie and held her gaze for a moment. No speeches. No ceremony, just the shared understanding of how close life had come to not being there at all. Elise brought plates to the table. Tom lifted Grace into her high chair. Natalie stood and washed her hands at the kitchen sink out of habit, water running over scars you could not see. When she turned back, Grace reached a tiny hand toward her, fingers opening and closing like an invitation. Natalie stepped closer, and Grace grabbed her finger with the same surprising strength she had in the hospital. Tom raised a glass of water, the gesture simple and sincere. To Natalie, he said quietly. Elise nodded. To the nurse who refused to let a hallway decide our story. Natalie looked down at Grace, then back at them. She did not offer a lesson. She did not claim heroism. She simply sat at the table and let the ordinary moment exist, steady and real. The kind of moment Tom had missed for years and would not miss again.